Hello, and welcome to DTV, your source for news about politics in the Democratic Party in Knox County. And I'm Michael Davis, and I'll be your host for DTV. And today we're here for a closer look at the candidates in Knoxville City Council election on November the 7th. DTV wants to remind you that early voting starts on October the 18th and runs through November 2nd. And for more information about early voting and its locations, you can go to www.knoxcounty.org/election. We have with us for this segment District 2 candidates, Andrew Roberto and Wayne Christensen. Andrew, Wayne, welcome to DTV, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Glad that y'all are here today. I'm sure that life is quite exciting for you both right now.
I'd say that's true.
Good, good. Well, District 2 would most commonly be referred to as the southern part of West Knoxville. So we have several issues to get to, but very briefly, please tell our viewers about your district and why you want to represent it. And Andrew, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Knoxville, so I went through our public schools here. I graduated from UT. I went to UT for law school. I'm fortunate to have a small business here as well. You know, I really got involved in this race because of my two daughters. I've got a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old. They're really talented, great kids, and I want to make sure that they have the same access to opportunity that I had when I was growing up. We don't want to see, you know, the talent that we've grown here in Knoxville have to move away because there's not enough opportunity here. So that's really one of the driving forces for me to be involved in this race.
Thank you. And Wayne.
I was an officer in the Navy before coming here to work for Whittle Communications on the editorial side. I spent a decade there in this very fast-paced company. The next 2 decades I spent working full-time in community service at Knox Youth Sports, which is at Lakeshore Park in West Knoxville. Over the course of 2 decades, we had about 30,000 kids come through on a year-round basis. We tried to grow them up. They're 3-year-olds to 13-year-olds. We tried to build their character through team sports. And so I've had 2 great careers here in Knoxville. I'm since retired 14 months ago or so. My wife's had a great career in graphic design here, and my son was raised in the schools and churches and neighborhoods of the city and has a 1, 3, a 5, and a 7 of his own right now, and he's doing well. The 2nd District really runs from the Ag Campus to Turkey Creek, mostly along Kingston Pike, and it has a lot of finger annexations, and it's a very healthy and, for the most part, stabilized part of town. And I've talked to endless folks about what they would like to see done in this area. None of them really point to one major issue, although sidewalks is right up there, police protection is right up there, and jobs is right up there. So I've got plans, positions on each of those 3 issues.
Okay, thank you. So we all know that every district in Knoxville faces its own unique challenges, but as a city council member, you're going to have to deal with the biggest challenges facing the entire city. So in your view, what are the biggest challenges facing Knoxville right now? How do you plan to address them? Wayne, we'll hear from you first on this one.
I think universally the biggest challenge is probably jobs. And I'm very interested in creating jobs for kids who are not going to go to college, particularly in the construction industry or in the composite industry, which we have a growing segment of because of the boat building that is going on around here. I've talked to contractors, and they say that the workforce is at 50% staffing level. So they're bringing crews in from out of state, Alabama and Georgia. If KUB puts a sewer line down an alley in Island Home, they'll do the same thing. And so our local folks aren't being paid. I also think that emphasis on job creation for students graduating from undergraduate school and graduate school here need to be kept here. They're going by the score to Nashville for a variety of reasons, but one of them is certainly jobs. And so there are many jobs being created out of Oak Ridge. Innovation Valley and the Chamber are working on other jobs. I don't think we can emphasize jobs enough.
Okay. And Andrew?
Well, I think, really positive economic growth is one of the things I hear about a lot when I'm out talking to voters. Going back to one of the reasons that I was running, is making sure that we all have access to good opportunity. I was knocking on one young lady's door the other day, and she said that where she was, that she didn't feel like there was a lot of opportunity, and so we had a really good discussion about what that looks like. I think we've got to, if you were going to look at a community that was going to be able to have really good, positive economic growth, you would build Knoxville. We've got access to great natural resources. We have, phenomenal big economic partners here in town in Oak Ridge National Laboratory, TVA, and the University of Tennessee that we can really leverage to help bring some additional economic opportunity here in town. The other thing to look at is what we're going to do with the recode. I think the recode is a great opportunity to try to emphasize private investment and to bring in, some mixed use and some other things that will really revitalize our community. Overall, if you look at why I think Knoxville's been successful over so many years, it's because we've had a really good balanced approach. We've been a place where you can have a good economic opportunity and find a job, but you can also, it's a good place to raise a family. And we've got to make sure we stay balanced in that in the future.
Okay, thank you. So on the note of balance, homelessness continues to be a serious issue in various parts of the city, but it's very prevalent in neighborhoods that skirt downtown. What are your thoughts on addressing the myriad of issues that contribute to homelessness and how to manage the momentum of downtown and development in every district alongside homelessness issues? And Andrew?
Well, I'm fortunate to serve as the board chair of the Salvation Army, and this is, one area that the Salvation Army does work on is with homelessness. I'm really excited about the opportunities that are given in at the Salvation Army. Really, what they're looking at there is what's called Operation Bootstraps, and that's where folks who've decided that they want to get out of being homeless now, they come in, they're given a shelter where they live on campus, they're given training for computer work, they're given resume work. Eventually what they're trying to do is get them to a point where they can find a job, and then as they're getting work, then they start to get used to paying bills, and then they find their way out, and there's a caseworker that follows them the entire time. I think that's a great way of looking at trying to deal with homelessness, but there's no one solution that's going to work in this, and I want to make sure that we're listening to everybody, all the stakeholders involved, so that we can try to find solutions that make sense for everybody. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. And I can't remember what the second part of your question was now.
Basically, just that, there's so many issues. How do you manage the momentum of downtown development alongside those kinds of issues?
Well, I think you've got to, thinking about development downtown, we've had a lot of private investment, a lot of emphasis going on downtown. I think what we need to do now is to start see that emphasis going down along our corridors and into areas where more higher density is possible to do. That will really help us, pump a lot of energy into the economy, I think. And then we can afford to do things like expanding our sidewalks and having, more interconnectivity in our greenways.
Do you see any balance or ways that mental health treatment in particular enters into that equation of these?
Well, definitely. I think mental health treatment is certainly an issue that is part of the puzzle here. There's also the opioid epidemic that's going on as well. So we've got to address all of those. I mean, this is not a single one-size-fits-all solution. There's going to be a lot of people that we need to collaborate with, a lot of groups, in order to be able to find a solution. And I think with regard to opioids, the City Council has some things we can do by looking at nuisance laws and then also looking at our zoning to make sure we're boxing out pill mills, but then also making sure we have enough officers on the streets so that we can do community policing.
Okay. And Wayne?
The way Knoxville has attacked homelessness thus far, the way that has been most effective is to provide homes. And while there are scant few homes compared to the number of people who are homeless, more could be done in that way. I think looking to other cities' best practices is a perfect idea with this particular problem. For example, tiny houses can be put into a grouping and made into a neighborhood for homeless folks. Shipping containers can be converted into homes. In California right now, they're doing just this, and they're supplying an officer of the law 24/7. They're providing medical help for these folks in those places, and then they're providing career counseling and everyday life counseling. And so to me, putting them in one place is a good idea, because where they are right now, they're walking across the street in front of traffic in front of Carm. There simply got to be a better place and a better way to deal with them. And I come back to it again, housing is the place to start, and everything else needs to fill in as support.
Okay. So how would you respond to voters who would say that the quote-unquote normal sort of development should take priority over these issues, and especially in areas that have a potential, a great economic potential to raise the tax base for Knoxville?
We simply can't turn our back on homelessness in favor of economic development. If I had a magic wand, I would create enough jobs so that all the homeless folks would have a job. So I see them as linked, but it's a very complex issue, as every city in the country is dealing with. About, if I remember my numbers correctly, there are like 400,000 homeless in the country, and that is just a very big problem. But clearly, economic development is going to continue to go on, and perhaps some of the things that happen under RECODE will allow for housing to be plugged in some of those areas as well.
Thank you. Moving on to some of the issues that y'all have already touched on a little bit: policing, safety, and community health. Policing issues are a deep concern all across the country right now, with nearly every mid-size and large city. So what policing issues in particular do you see in Knoxville, and if elected, what influence would you exert to address them? And Wayne, we'll start with you on this one.
The biggest policing issue that I see is understaffing. And what it means is, on any given night on Magnolia Avenue, for miles and miles, there will be 2 officers, 2 squad cars assigned. That very same thing, according to officers I've talked to, exists on Sutherland Avenue. I talked with a woman in Oakwood Lincoln Park just last week. She was involved in a violent situation with some other folks. 3 people called the police, and it took 20 minutes for the first squad car to show up. That's simply not a good response time. It creates unsafe conditions, and so the academies that the police department does are occasional, as I understand it. There's one now. There are 20 folks in it. It'll graduate about 14 of those for various reasons. I think we ought to have an academy going perhaps every quarter until we get back up to a staffing level that is 100% or 100% plus. One of the things that drives the staffing level down is Chief Roush and his staff do such a good job of training everybody. They get hired away. We just lost a Hispanic officer to the Secret Service, of all places, and so that's how well they're trained. So we really have to focus on this problem. I think we have to focus on officers' wages and officers' retirement.
Okay. Thank you. And Andrew?
I'm a big advocate of community policing. And what that means is that you have officers that are, out of their car, walking around in a neighborhood. They build relationships inside the community. They're talking to the neighbors. They have a better sense of what's going on and where the problem areas are. And I think that's a great approach, and it's really the approach that Chief Roush has been pushing for many years, and it's the right way to do things. If you look at the size in the scope of the number of officers that we have serving right now, it's about 88% of what it was 20 years ago. If you take the class that's just now graduated and is going through training right now, it's under 80% of that number. Now, Knoxville's changed a lot over that 20 years. And, you know, there's more that we're expecting of our officers. There's greenways that need to be protected. There's different task force that they're assigned to. And so overtime is a real issue that we need to look at. So what I've called for us to do is do a review of the staffing size of the police department to make sure that we're adequately equipped so that we can effectively community police.
Okay. So how would you respond to people that would say, we simply don't want to have to raise our budget for that. We don't want to have to pull taxes out of Knoxville citizens in order to do that?
Well, I mean, I think you've got to look at how are you going to grow the economy if you don't have a safe environment. You've got to make sure, you know, no one's going to want to move into the city. We're not going to be able to grow. We're not going to be able to have that balance we talked about before between raising a family and being able to have good opportunities if we don't have an effective a group that's able to get out and deal with the issues, and they're not working so many overtime hours that they can't be involved in community policing. So I'd say it needs to be one of our priorities. We need to first look at the number that we need to do that review, look at the number that it would take, and then work our way to getting there.
Okay, thank you. So with the past city council, moving a little bit to elections here, with the past city council primary election, we saw a tie vote. Very quickly, because the current city election schedule, due to having to comply with early voting laws, made it impossible to have a runoff election to break that tie, which required setting the sitting city council members to vote to break that tie. Do you see this as a problem? And if so, what would each of you do or suggest as a possible solution to that? Just briefly. And we'll start with you on this one, Andrew.
Okay. You know, I think that one of the first things the new council needs to do when we get together is look at how to deal with the tie situation. I don't feel like anyone really, you know, thought that was the best solution, but it was the only solution that was available. And I really want to make sure that we're not having city council make decisions that we're asking the voters to make. You know, as a former Knox County election commissioner, I'm pretty passionate about elections and making sure that people register to vote and actually participate in our process. So I think that's the first thing we need to address is making sure that tie doesn't happen again.
Okay, thanks. And Wayne?
From what I'm hearing, the chances of that tie happening again are once in 50 million, or some bigger number than that.
Yet it did happen.
It did happen, but I simply don't see it as a big problem. I think the bigger problem by far is the lack of voter participation in the primary, and perhaps in this upcoming election, 10% or so of 80,000 people voting is simply not the right way to run a democracy in our city.
Okay. One last question, just about 30 seconds apiece on this, please. Also on elections. Our city council elections allow citywide voting after the district-only primaries. So do you think this manner of voting is working for Knoxville, or should we take a second look at it? Wayne?
I've spent a lot of time talking to Cliff Rogers about the scheduling of all of city council folks at the same time. He's very much against it for a variety of reasons. I'm sticking with his approach as of right now. I think the system we have doesn't turn out very many people, but those that do come out are very interested in the candidates they vote for.
Okay. All right, Andrew.
You know, I think what's really good about the current system is that it encourages the district, you know, candidates to get out in the community and hear from voters that they might not have otherwise had experience with. And you know, in the primary, I spent a lot of time in the district. We knocked on, you know, or made attempts at over 3,000 doors. We're doing that now in the general election all over the city. And I've met a lot of, you know, fantastic people, and I've heard a lot about what's going on, and I want to be able to be somebody who is accessible, who can listen to those concerns and take action.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you both, gentlemen, Wayne Christensen and Andrew Roberto, and thank you for watching DTV with us today. I'm Michael Davis. Remember, early voting starts on October the 18th.